When an Israeli airstrike hit Hamas negotiators in Qatar, the world saw it as yet another escalation. One more step away from peace. The attack violated the sovereignty of an American ally. It risked dragging the Middle East into a wider regional war. And it appeared to shatter what little remained of diplomacy. Yet it was from this very moment that a deal was born. An agreement announced by President Donald Trump, aimed at securing the release of all remaining hostages. A goal that had remained out of reach for nearly 2 years, even under his predecessor. This is not the end of the conflict. It is not even peace. But if this agreement holds, it could become the most significant diplomatic achievement of Trump's second term. Not because it created a new solution, but because it forced actors unwilling to make peace to finally stop fighting. Is this about peace, or about who gets to write the rules? The Board of Peace was born out of failure. The failure of multilateral diplomacy to stop the war in Gaza. The failure of the United Nations to produce decisions that were fast, binding, and enforceable. The United States calls it a pragmatic solution. The UN framework wasn't delivering outcomes, said a US State Department official. According to Washington, the Board of Peace is not a replacement for the UN, but a shortcut. And this is where the problems begin. What started as a mechanism for a Gaza ceasefire has evolved into a global body with cross-regional authority. Its structure is far from neutral. President Donald Trump has been designated chairman for life, with sole veto power over strategic decisions. In practice, this means one individual holds final control over the international peace agenda. For Western audiences, this is not a technical detail. It touches one of the most sensitive issues in modern global politics: abuse of power. The second problem is access. Permanent membership in the Board of Peace reportedly requires a contribution of $1 billion. Not based on population. Not based on impact or involvement in conflicts, but on the ability to pay. European diplomats have cynically labeled it peace by paywall. If peace requires an entry fee, then this is not multilateralism. It is elite selection based on money and political proximity. It is no surprise that France, Germany, Italy, and the Nordic countries have refused to join. Their objection is not about Gaza. It is about precedent. A global body outside the UN framework. Led for life. With personal veto power? And a membership fee in the billions. For Europe, this is not innovation. It is the normalization of power without international legal accountability. The Board of Peace promises speed and results. But the price it demands is far higher. The question of who gets to decide what peace means, and who does not. For the first time since World War II, Washington and Europe disagree on what peace even means. Europe's rejection of the Board of Peace is not about Gaza. And it is not because Europe opposes peace. Quite the opposite. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom have openly voiced structural objections, not moral ones. The problem is not what is being pursued, but how and who decides. France has called the Board of Peace Charter incompatible with its international commitments, particularly the UN Charter. Britain has raised concerns over legitimacy and legal precedent, while Germany has warned of the erosion of the post-World War II multilateral order. At its core, the issue is simple: legality. Since 1945, the West has built global peace on shared rules. Not on a single figure. Not on lifetime power. And not on personal vetoes. The Board of Peace violates all three pillars at once. First, a chairman for life. In Western political systems, lifetime authority is not a symbol of stability. It is a red flag. Second, sole veto power. This is not collective security, but the centralization of peace decisions in the hands of one country and one person. Third, a structure outside the United Nations. For Europe, this is not merely a bureaucratic bypass, but a direct threat to the international legal system it has defended for 8 decades. That is why the rejection is not emotional. There is no anti-American rhetoric, no opposition to a Gaza ceasefire. What exists instead is an institutional red line. And at this point, something rare has become clear. The Western world is no longer speaking with one voice. Washington defines peace as a fast, enforceable outcome. Europe defines it as a legitimate process accountable to international law. This divide is not technical. It is philosophical. And for the first time since World War II, America and Europe are not just divided on strategy. They are divided on the very meaning of peace. You can't rebuild a city by pretending the people who owned it never existed. In official documents and internal discussions within the Board of Peace, Gaza is repeatedly described as a reconstruction project. A new zone. A new city. Towers, tourist districts, and modern infrastructure. The language is technocratic. Almost neutral. But that neutrality is precisely the problem. For many European diplomats, this approach treats Gaza not as a populated territory, but as an empty plot of land. A post-war real estate project. Yet most of the land in Gaza is not state property. It is privately owned, with ownership records dating back to the Ottoman era, updated under the British Mandate, and recognized within various international legal frameworks. The crucial problem is simple. The Board of Peace has not explained how that land would be acquired. There is no acquisition mechanism, no compensation scheme, no property courts or arbitration bodies. In international law, such gaps are not technical details. They are danger zones. Reconstruction without clarity on ownership risks becoming something else entirely. A legalized form of expropriation carried out under the cover of crisis. This is what makes France, Germany, and the Nordic countries deeply uneasy. For them, physical rebuilding without recognition of property rights is not a post-war solution, but a structural violation of humanitarian law and international property law. And the implications go far beyond Gaza. If this precedent is accepted, the consequences would be global. If a devastated territory can be rebuilt without resolving the ownership rights of its people, then future conflicts, from Ukraine to the Caucasus, will find new justification to erase civilian claims in the name of reconstruction. That is why, for Europe and for many legal experts in the United States, the question of Gaza is not about urban design. It is about principle. Does reconstruction mean rebuilding lives? Or simply building over them, while pretending the owners were never there at all? This isn't endorsement. It's damage control. The entry of Arab states into the Board of Peace has often been interpreted as political support for Trump's initiative. That interpretation is wrong. There is no romanticism here. No blind confidence. What exists is hard calculation. For Cairo, Doha, and Riyadh, the question is not whether the Board of Peace is legitimate under international law. The question is far more practical. What happens if they are not inside it? The answer is obvious. Decisions will still be made, just without them. Egypt understands that whoever controls post-war Gaza will shape the future of the Rafah border, refugee flows, and the stability of Sinai. To be absent from the table would mean losing influence over its own national security red lines. Qatar sees a different reality. It holds key leverage with Hamas. But that leverage only matters if it is present in the forum where money, reconstruction, and political legitimacy are consolidated. Saudi Arabia is looking at a broader map. Post-war Gaza is not an isolated issue. It is part of a new regional architecture, normalization, investment, and Riyadh's role as a regional power broker. By joining, Arab states are not granting a stamp of legitimacy. They are securing an informal veto seat. Early access to information, influence over initial designs, and the ability to slow down the worst-case scenarios. This is a logic that has repeated itself throughout the history of crisis diplomacy. Better to be inside the room where bad decisions are made than outside the room, left to absorb the consequences. Because for the Arab world, the Board of Peace is not an ideal solution. It is a risk to be managed. And in international politics, managing risk is often far more important than trusting intentions. The UN is slow. Trump is fast. But speed without law has a name: power. The Board of Peace is being sold as a solution to a classic problem of global diplomacy. The United Nations is slow, bound by procedure, and often paralyzed by vetoes. In Washington's logic, that is not a bug. It is a systemic failure. The Board of Peace offers the opposite: rapid coordination, a streamlined structure, centralized decisions. No Security Council. No five-nation consensus. No resolutions buried for years. The problem is that this speed comes at a steep price: the absence of international legal authority. The UN, however inefficient it may be, rests on the UN Charter, a legal framework recognized by nearly every country in the world, with legitimacy, accountability mechanisms, and decades of legal precedent. The Board of Peace has none of that. It was not born from a multilateral treaty, is not bound by international law, and possesses no enforcement mechanism beyond the political and economic power of its members. This is the core of Europe's concern. Not Gaza. Not Trump. But precedent. If global conflicts begin to be managed through ad hoc, coalition-based bodies, then international law shifts from a shared set of rules into an option used only when convenient. The world is not descending into total chaos. What is happening is more subtle and more dangerous. We are entering a fragmented order, where conflicts are resolved not by universal law, but by temporary coalitions with aligned interests. Fast, flexible, effective in the short term. Fragile, arbitrary, and unequal in the long term. The UN may be slow, but it provides one thing that cannot be bought, cannot be accelerated, and cannot be bypassed: legitimacy. The question is not whether the UN era is truly ending. The sharper question is this: when international law is replaced by speed and power, who will be protected? And who will be left behind? This is not just a story about Gaza. It is a story about the direction of the world. The Board of Peace makes one thing unmistakably clear: the old global order is being abandoned even by those who built it. International law is seen as too slow. Multilateralism is judged inefficient. And power is once again being packaged as a solution. The question is not whether this works today. The question is, who pays the price tomorrow? Because when peace is determined by those who are fastest and strongest, the weak do not lose on the battlefield. They lose at the decision-making table.